It started with a video. Shocking, brutal, and in my eyes, an obscenity. As a veterinary physiotherapist, I knew what I was seeing wasn't just harsh, it was unacceptable. So I recorded my reaction, and like so many in the equestrian world, I waited to see what would happen next. The public outcry was fierce. The governing body had to respond. But was it enough? Now, in this podcast series, I break down the scandal, the reactions, and the resolutions that followed, tracing the journey from Olympic glory to the moment everything unravelled. This is Charlotte Dujardin, the scandal, the backlash, the consequences. I'm Caroline Lindsay, horsesaddlerider.com. Let's begin. In this episode, we go beyond the headlines, back to November when the FEI gathered in Abu Dhabi for a conference that could quietly shape the future of competitive dressage. Behind closed doors, delegates held in-depth discussions on the pressing concerns that emerged during the Olympic scandal, from welfare oversight to judging transparency and the role of ethics in elite sport. I break down what was said, what it signals, and highlight where the change is truly on the horizon. So today I wanted to take a look at the outcome of the FEI meeting in Abu Dhabi earlier this year. And although I've looked at the original FEI press release on this, I found that Euro Dressage has simplified it. So let's take a look at that. And the headline about the proposed rule changes at the FEI General Assembly reveal a snaffle debate, favourable draw, and WCF judges panel being reduced to 5. At the meeting in Abu Dhabi on the 10th to the 13th of November 24, the largest gathering of heads of national equestrian federations from around the world. So quite a big shindig there. We find ourselves at a pivotal moment for equestrian sport, and the General Assembly is a great opportunity to evaluate where we stand globally as an organisation, while allowing us to look ahead and create our roadmap for the future together, said FEI President Ingmar de Vos. And rule changes and propositions for change in the sport will be voted upon. Dressage Technical Committee will present a report at the FEI General Assembly. In the online copy, she wrote that the Dressage Technical Committee conducted remote monthly meetings throughout 2024, along with an in-person meeting held in Lausanne. These meetings have been essential for monitoring progress and ensuring continuity in our activities and initiatives as part of the corporate memory. This year, remote stakeholder meetings were held with members of the DTC, the dressage director, as well as with athletes, trainers and officials at several events throughout the year. So a wide range of organisations and riders, members of the FEI, have been invited to contribute. And I mentioned in an earlier video that not all stakeholders are equal. So, for example, the riders may not agree with tighter restrictions that potentially the judges may want to see in place. So different viewpoints there. And having sat in a working group and a couple of committees, I've seen firsthand how difficult it is for many individuals to agree with each other. So you can end up with a diluted solution. The feedback from these meetings was very positive, and we look forward to continuing the approach as we collectively forge the future strategy for the sport, said the chair. Alonso wrote that there has been significant media criticisms of the sport. Oh yes, especially in relation to high-profile cases involving failings of equine welfare in the sport. Can't they just call it as it is? Horse abuse? and one of them being rider abuse while a horse was attacked while the rider was riding, which could have resulted in very serious injury. But that seemed to have passed right over their disciplinary heads. A key outcome from the meeting on the 1st of October was the collective acknowledgement that there is a loss of public trust in the sport, and this situation must be addressed by all stakeholders immediately. Well, unless they start bringing in some technology, and yes, they have started bringing in or looking at the science behind some of these issues, but we've now got the technology to monitor the rules. And I'm thinking behind the vertical here, where horses show either some weakness in their head and neck carriage or some restrictive hands from the riders. We've got the means to measure remotely and feed it straight back to the judges. And yeah, we're on the brink of the public saying we're not going to tolerate this. Certainly the UK public. So many of them have jumped to considering that we don't belong on a horse's back at all. And I myself have been recently considering the issue of training and conditioning horses physically, and reflected on how uncomfortable training can be if you've engaged in any yourself, as in your own fitness. And how far should we go in applying measures, techniques that, for example, condition the musculature of the horse? And how much do they or should they get to choose? It's fairly straightforward in show jumpers because, for example, they may stop at a jump and then they may be fine when the rider comes around again and they'll jump the jump. But it's a bit different for dressage horses because their training should result in a harmonious, fluent, correctly, healthily moving performance, but it's much harder to determine. So I think it's time to get brave and say behind the vertical for X number of strides will incur penalties. And if they don't do something tangible, and we see more and more dressage riders ending up in the disciplinary process, then we're not going to inspire any confidence in the public. And incidentally, yes, I agree, riders should be sanctioned, but that's not going to make the biggest difference here because they can still continue to train behind doors, out of sight. They can demand that there are no cameras around when they're training. So people need to have a contingency, a plan for when they see horses being ill-treated so that they can do something about it. So even if they can't confront the rider themselves, then they should know where to report this to. They should also know that they will need a witness. So, for example, 2 or 3 of them coming forward together so that they can state what happened. So I think when the FEI said that we are all guardians, what they meant was it's not practical, it's not sustainable, and it won't prevent cruelty if we've only got sanctions to apply. So let's make it normal to question riders who apply unethical techniques and practices. And I'm not saying this is easy, it's not. But in the wake of the recent cases of horse abuse in training, many people on social media have said, well, everybody's doing it, so what's the problem? What can we do? Well, if you've said that and you believe and you've seen that horse abuse has become normalised, why haven't you done something about it? Why haven't you spoken up? Why are you complacent? I think we need to reflect on that, and we all need to do our bit for these horses, or we will not be able to ride them in the future. I think it will be dropped from the Olympics, perhaps not the next Olympics, but potentially the next one. And there are those who are always campaigning for horse racing. Who would ever have thought that dressage, representing the highest standards and quality of horse movement and quality of training. Who would have thought they would have been categorized with horse racing? So the proposed rule changes related to dressage are, and this was a selection made by Euro Dressage, it may not be everything, snaffle option up to Grand Prix. Given the current circumstances regarding the scrutiny and questioning of the dressage sport, we ask the FEI to re-evaluate its decision that it's mandatory from level CDI 3-star and CDIO 3-star and higher to ride with a double bridle. We think it is in the best interest for the dressage sport to make it optional and allow riders to use a snaffle if they deem this is in their best interest as a combination. So yeah, why is it that a dressage horse taking years to train must compete in a double bridle at the higher levels? A snaffle bridle or double bridle is allowed in all categories except for CDIP and CDICH events where snaffle bridle is compulsory. The DTC responded with no change. As it was communicated last year, the FEI DTC has the unanimous understanding that the use of snaffle or double bridle is a technical sport matter and not a matter of well-being or welfare. We understand the concerns regarding the social media perception, but on this topic, it is our understanding that the perception and reality are not aligned. Despite the amount of relevant work carried out until now, conclusive and/or unquestionable evidence has not been brought to the DTC that allow us to reach to a different conclusion. Yeah, fair enough that if there is evidence that snaffle bridles are more harsh than double bridles, then they need to see the research on that. But you could argue that horses become quieter when you place two bits in the mouth and a curb chain, and that they would appear very respectful of that because they know they can be hurt. So therefore, the rider's hands may be softer in a double bridle because of the curb, largely, I believe, and that riders can't haul on a snaffle in competition because it would be quite obvious that excess pressure was being applied. But again, is it because we rush these horses? Is it because many of them are very hot, reactive horses, so require restraining or some form of restraint to be ridden? You tell me. What do you think? However, it should be noted that from a technical perspective, the DTC is willing and available to be part of a round table that includes a multidisciplinary team of experts from all stakeholders to discuss the correct fitting and possible modernising of the double bridle. Oh, time to talk about correct fitting of it. Well, as I see in many cases, the nosebands being fitted far too high than what is scientifically recommended. And that's potentially because if the noseband was fitted in the recommended area on the horse's nose, it would interfere with the bits. As stated, based on many years of experience, the data currently at hand and the results achieved, the DTC remains of the opinion that using the double bridle at top sport level is not a welfare issue. Well, what evidence have they got that it's not a welfare issue? Again, technology here. Let's fit some remote rein tension sensors on the reins and get some data for riders who are not riding in a forward soft contact. Because some of our medal winners may not have been medal winners if their rein tension had been measured. Interestingly, the German NF, the IDTC and the IDRC confirmed that we do not share the opinion that using a double bridle is a matter of horse welfare. Okay, where's your evidence for that? We do support the step to have a roundtable discussion. However, a prerequisite for coming to a reasonable conclusion is to have results of significantly more meaningful scientific studies on the subject. For example, on what a bit does in a horse's mouth. Well, that's physiology. Maybe they ought to try some bits in their own mouths to generate some evidence. The Swedish NF stated, obviously, it is practically impossible for athletes and officials to notice if a horse's tongue turns blue during the competition, which makes it a challenge to do something about it in the moment. Yes, I agree with that. It is difficult. Therefore, we must avoid such situations as much as we can. Again, rein tension devices so that they've got some data to potentially evidence that a rider is not being heavy in the hand and that somehow the horse has developed a blue tongue and it's not with hand pressure. None of this is difficult nowadays. Considering this, we are once again asking the FEI to allow athletes to ride on snaffle bridle, as we strongly believe it is in the best interest for the dressage sport. We also believe that making the double bridle optional and instead make it possible to adapt the equipment to each horse's psychological and physical needs is crucial to secure the public's acceptance of the sport. Well, yeah, great. Let's consider the horses as individuals, and if they do work better in a snaffle bridle, let's let those competitors come forward and compete and monitor their rein tension also. The outside world's reactions to what happened during the Olympics were very bad for the sport of dressage, and we must do what we can to deserve and get their trust. Well, you better be quick about it. FEI feedback, no change. As it was communicated last year, the FEI DTC has the unanimous understanding that the use of snaffle or double bridle is a technical sport matter and not a matter of well-being welfare. We understand the concerns regarding the social media perception, but on this topic, it is our understanding that the perception and reality are not aligned, despite the amount of relevant work carried out until now. Conclusive and or unquestionable evidence has not been brought to the DTC that allow us to reach a different conclusion. However, it should be noted that from a technical perspective, the DTC is willing and available to be part of a round table that includes a multidisciplinary team of experts from all stakeholders to discuss the correct fitting and possible modernising of the double bridle, as stated based on many years of experience, the data currently at hand and the results achieved. The DTC remains of the opinion that using the double bridle at top sport level is not a welfare issue. Some deja vu there. I could have sworn I just read that. The DTC suggests that this topic could be further evaluated during the 2025 season by encouraging organisers to include a special restricted class for athletes who wish to use the snaffle bridle in Grand Prix up to CDI 3-star level. Data from these studies would assist in the future assessment of the topic. So yes, they've taken a step towards allowing snaffles, but they're still going to have their exclusive double bridle classes. Favourable draws for higher ranked athletes. The use of random draw for the starting order is further deconstructed by a proposed rule to put the highest scoring and FEI highest ranked riders consistently in the most beneficial starting place in follow-up tests. Random draws have statistically been proven to be the most fair for athletes to create a level field of play for their assessment by the judges, whose points automatically go towards the end of the test. Science is again disregarded. So yeah, if you're competing, it should be a level playing field. Should riders ride in random order? Would that make it fairer? Yes, I can't see why not. Proposed wording: the starting order for all competitions for which athletes have had to qualify by competing in an earlier competition shall be determined by way of a draw in groups of 5 in reverse order of the results of the earlier competition. Yeah, eventing and show jumping, the riders at the top of the ranking are able to watch the lower ranked riders complete the course first so that they see which are the trickier fences. that horses are consistently challenged by, so that the higher ranked riders can modify their plans when it comes to doing the same course. It's kind of not fair. The highest rank athlete horse combinations will start last. There you go. In case of ties within one starting group, the combinations that are tied shall be drawn in the same group and numbers adjusted accordingly. Noseband measuring device, confirmed for January 2025. Initially, testing will be introduced at higher level events, initially in order to accustom everyone to the testing and also allow time to train the officials. Based on what I've seen in social media about problems this may cause for the horses and their performance, it'll allow time to train the horses. Elimination due to lameness, proposed change in a case of marked lameness. The judge at sea informs the athlete that they are eliminated. There is no appeal against this decision. In competitions that are not qualifying for a next test, the horse needs to pass a re-inspection by the FEI veterinarian to be able to start the next test, i.e., normally the test that takes place the day after. Well, should there not be a veterinarian sitting at sea as well? Because they have the last word on this. It's not up to a layperson, certainly in the UK, to declare a horse sound. The perspective is that signs of lameness have been observed, so that the only professional individual who can declare a horse sound and free from lameness is a veterinarian. So very important distinction there. And also that research has shown that more than half of sport horses show some signs of lameness that the riders are unaware of. So lameness is not an uncommon occurrence. They need to get real with the research because it is out there. And the judging panel at World Cup finals will be reduced to 5 judges from 7 in an effort to reduce organising costs. Euro dressage suggestion: keep 7 judges for fairer judging and less individual influence, and don't invite the JSP to reduce costs. And then there's rules about ponies and children competing. I won't go through theirs. I'm not sure of the significance of those, but if you wish to read it, here it is. Just pause. Spur measurement. The DTC has rediscussed this topic following the feedback received and agrees that the measurement of spurs should be from the boot to the tip of the shank. Proposed wording: in children and pony competitions, spurs are optional, but if used, only blunt metal spurs are allowed. The shank may not be longer than 3.5 centimetres, measured from the boot to the tip. 3.5. Spurs with rowels are not allowed. I know some have argued that obviously spiky rowels look somewhat abusive, but a rowel is a rolling part on the spur. So the fact that it rolls along the horse's skin, you might consider that that's a more ethical option. Obviously, no spurs at all is the most ethical when not used for very subtle communication with the horse. But spurs that are 3.5 centimetres, But then you could argue that because of the different shapes of the horse's rib cage, different degrees of roundness, and different lengths of the rider's leg, perhaps, for example, a rider whose legs are already close to the horse can injure the horse more easily than a rider whose legs are further away from the horse's rib cage, so that it's more difficult for them to make contact with the horse's sides. So something else to think about there. Going off course, proposed wording for young horses tests, children, pony and junior tests, the deduction for the first error is 0.5 percentage points from the total score, second error 1 percentage point, and for the third error, elimination. Okay, so that's for wrong moves on the dressage course. And then there's decisions about increased entry fee. I won't read those. And to make the athletes' electronic judges sheets public, yeah, that's a good one. So that's the first step potentially towards making judges accountable for and justifying their marking, potentially. Point 4 defines that access to the athletes' electronic judges sheets is strictly personal. Recent events, e.g. FEI Dressage World Cup Amsterdam, lead to disastrous allegation of welfare of the horses not being of the highest importance to athletes and judges, which makes an urgent repair under criteria 1 necessary. Yes. So something struck home there. But if anyone watches, for example, rugby, American football, there's a running commentary about referees' decisions, decision making. So, yeah, why not have some dialogue? Or at least perhaps some dialogue at the end of the test, while they're waiting for the horse to leave the arena and for the next one to come in. If the remarks of judges would have been published, this situation would not have come up. IDOC deem it important for the transparency of the sport, the understanding of the public, and our social license to publish these remarks as soon as competitions are finished. Yeah, what's to hide? The DTC responded, the DTC is in principle supportive of this proposal as an initiative which may increase transparency and understanding of the sport. However, we believe that to make this possible, this requires a clear and unequivocal agreement from all stakeholders, i.e., does that include the judges themselves? The DTC suggests that should first be consultation with the athletes, IDRC, and trainers, IDTC. And following that consultation process, the proposal could be trialled on a pilot basis at selected events. It is also the view of the DTC that any future rule change would only be introduced at senior level for CDI 3-star and above. No change to the existing rule until further consideration following the consultation and trial process as set out above. The IDRC and the IDTC have welcomed the proposal for further consultation prior to a final rule change being proposed. So yeah, how are we all going to improve if we don't know what the judges are doing? The British NF commented, the privacy and confidentiality of individual score sheets have always been maintained at all levels, and there is a danger that comments could be taken out of context. Yeah, we would therefore support the FEI in rejecting this. Oh, come on, UK. Over here, we have the highest, most stringent standards of individuals' data protection, but if somebody's competing, and if we're all supposed to learn from this and progress, and it's a level playing field, then the score sheets should be public. And if riders are uneasy about that, then perhaps they shouldn't compete. So, no, I don't agree that it's about privacy and confidentiality of competing riders at the higher levels. And the German NF and IDRC believe we are not in favour of publishing the judges' comments. Publication would only lead to the comments becoming more and more general and less meaningful. Well, then what's the point of commenting? Yeah, why not just give a mark and don't comment? Or maybe that's what would happen more if the comments were not kept private. So there are pros and cons of that system, which are not based on privacy. IDOC. The IDOC Executive Board discussed the matter and re-evaluated its position. The board understands it should not be open to the public for the moment. It is a rider's right to have it private. IDOC therefore asks for the removal of the proposal. IDOC is open to discuss the matter with other stakeholders. Well, I'm sure they can compromise somewhere down the line. IDTC were not in favour of publishing the judge's comments. This could encourage unhelpful controversy and may lead to less meaningful marks. Well, the judges would then have to be more careful about what they write. Collective marks increased to 2. Once again, it's being proposed to increase the collective marks from 1 to 2 marks. The collectives used to be 4 marks and were reduced to 1 after it was statistically proven that these were abused or used to pull a score up or down in the end, in particular with famous riders. Harmony, lightness, straightness, suppleness, seat and aids, etc. are being judged movement per movement, and there is no need for another 4 marks at the bottom of a test. Yeah, quite. Over the years, some federations have continued to try to increase the collectives again, particularly German. Now they are trying this under the animal welfare banner. The proposal is general impression in accordance with horse welfare will be introduced. Well, yeah, great. Scale of training rhythm, suppleness, contact, impulsion, straightness, and collection. Yes. Although how can they do that generally or give a general mark with all the separate movements marked? Can they just say, okay, we'll give you 7 because the horse was mostly not tense, or we can give you a 10 because your horse was tense the whole way through the test? Not easy, but it's a step in the right direction. 2, harmony of rider and horse, position, effectiveness and sensitivity of riders' aids, both with a coefficient of 2. Yeah, let's have some technology introduced here. But maybe this is where they can give a mark or deduct marks from the collective, or give a lower mark there where a horse has spent some time behind the vertical. But I just think horses that are behind the vertical do not belong in dressage competition. Although the question becomes, how far behind the vertical could be tolerated? A couple of degrees, perhaps? I think they really need to look at that. It's interesting to see the argumentation that the conjointed German NFIDRC give for this. With their evaluation, the judge also gives the athlete and the trainer recommendations for the further education and training. It is not enough to only judge the technical execution of the test. It is often said that the judge should also recognise and judge all the principles of dressage riding, but the reality is often somewhat different. Oh, we're getting to the nitty-gritty now. These are the real issues facing judging and modern dressage. If there are 2 separate collective marks, one for the rider and one for the horse, or its training status, the judge is reminded to evaluate the principles of dressage riding at the end of each test. Well, modern dressage riding has now become so far removed for many competitors that so few of them are being ridden classically. So that's an issue they need to address. Adding the collective mark for the horse is an important step to ensure that the basic criteria, our principles of riding, remain paramount in judging the performance of a rider-horse combination. For the final explicit assessment of the training status of athlete and horse, an important contribution is made to the welfare of the horse. The DTC blocks this attempt and states no change to the number of collective marks. This topic was addressed in 2018 by the Dressage Judging Working Group Task Force, supported by the Nottingham Trent University, and it was concluded that collective marks exacerbate the cumulative effect on cognitive load. Does that mean that it's difficult to apply? Test ends with the final halt and salute, and all aspects are being judged continuously as the test takes place. The DTC proposes a further consultation with all stakeholder groups to review the phrasing of the general impression mark. This rule change proposal does not meet the criteria for urgent repair for welfare of the horse and should be instead considered as part of the next full rule revision process. They have a point there, but what the public don't want to see is abusive riding and uncomfortable horses, obviously uncomfortable horses, being given prizes. The DTC further adds that the DTC remains with its position from the 26th of June while stressing that the judges need to consider these factors in each movement mark rather than having to try to recall the whole test afterwards in order to award this additional mark. This will be further discussed at the next level 4 dressage judges meeting. Well, if you've watched my videos on the Olympic dressage comparisons, both for eventing and dressage, you'll realise that if you've only got 10 marks to give and suddenly you judge a movement, you have to potentially start at 10 and deduct marks, but there's a lot that they would need to deduct for. So when making the decision, they may be giving a high mark for harmony and accuracy, but a lower one for, say, for example, tension in the horse or some signs of discomfort, so that one cancels the other out, but potentially the rider can stack up a lot of marks for correctness so that it makes it quite difficult to get below a 7, say. Although I thought overall the judging and the allocation of marks at the Olympics did in the main reflect less than ideal riding. But I think once there's consensus on correct, healthy horse movement and moving away from what we see as modern dressage, which I think just looks something of a freak show, a circus these days. But it was refreshing to see Becky Moody on Yagabong. And to me, that's the future. That's the gold standard. And I so want to see her picking up gold medals in the next Olympics when the horse has a couple more years experience and muscle development, muscle strength, core strength under his belt. So let's keep the eye on the ball for that one. So then payment for officials, and that concludes. Thank you for your support, your comments, subscribing, encouragement for this important case of sport horse, dressage horse abuse. If you found this episode thought-provoking, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, leave a review. It really helps more equestrians and horse lovers find the podcast. You can also join the conversation on the Horse Saddle Rider YouTube channel. And finally, I'll be giving you more insights into the equestrian world. So be sure to come back and join me so that together we can campaign for better conditions for our sport horses.